Right, so as you will know if you saw the speech itself, or perhaps my video on Sunak's 5 promises the other day, promise number one was to halve inflation within the year, but he's conning us because it's going to come down anyway, and here's why I think that's the case. You see, the drivers of this inflation have been entirely Tory made. It began with the pandemic. Okay, fine, that's not their fault. And all the waste we saw associated with their handling of COVID, mishandling of it, which absolutely was their fault. £460 billion blown on it, and most was completely wasted, with no return on it, devaluing our currency and seeing inflation rise. What made it worse, though, was that when we'd finally seen some return to normality, when deaths and hospitalisations finally began to go down after the vaccine rollout, thanks to the NHS, not the Tories, the government couldn't open up the country fast enough, and they did it too fast. Nobody was prepared for it. There were massive shortages of all sorts of products, which saw the prices of all of those products soar as demand suddenly rose again, stoking inflation. But it didn't stop there. It wasn't the only aspect to consider. Energy prices soaring due to rampant profiteering by the energy companies has played its part too. They got away with it mainly by blaming Putin, but prices were going up before that. So it's a poor excuse, especially when it comes to our own economy, since only around 1% of our energy needs come from Russia. Tory deals with the energy companies, massive tax breaks in exchange for further exploration of our oil and gas fields, meant they could rampantly profit, whilst again, we as a nation saw little return from it. In fact, they gave the energy suppliers even more of our cash, printing more money to offset our now unaffordable energy bills to greater or lesser degrees, depending on individual circumstances. No return again on any of that, when instead of printing money like water, once again to paper over the cracks in their bungling administration and to cover up for their own crackpot ideology, they could have instead used that money to bring those markets under greater governmental control. Renationalisation, the boogeyman word, a word equivalent to a big hairy spider chasing a Tory around the room, isn't it? We can't do that. Who would make the money? Well, it's not us as things stand, is it? Massive profits plus huge subsidies makes for record-breaking profits for those companies, but that actually stoked inflation as well. Of course, much of the inflation has come from the consumer end too, as everything has become more expensive, thanks to the way not only that the Tories opened up too fast following the initial part of the pandemic back in 2021, it is of course still with us after all, but the Tories completely mismanaged Brexit too. They promised the earth and failed to deliver, mainly because they never thought as a nation we'd vote to leave, therefore didn't plan for what happened if the 2016 referendum went pear-shaped for them, which it did. But not half as badly as it consequently did for the rest of us, with food prices soaring as a result of that. Much of it is still unresolved to this day. And it's not just food either, because everything connected with supply chain issues that affect us in all manner of industries and markets, plus the role the pandemic played later on top of that too, all of it has stoked inflation. The one thing that didn't cause inflation is the one thing the Tories keep telling us will make it worse, apparently. Wage rises, income rises. Nobody has had any recently. They haven't stoked any of this inflation. Additional Tory spending to make those wages up to a livable level would, yes, require printing more money on their part. But the difference is when it's for people who will then go out and spend it in our economy and not hoard it like energy bigwigs and CEOs and billionaire Tory donors, the government does get a return on that. And that helps balance inflation and, of course, promotes growth in the economy. It's all a balancing act, after all. The Tories have spent public money on the worst things they could, whilst continuing to refuse to spend it on the things that would actually help, investing in their own citizens. They are the most economically illiterate bunch of brain cell deficient bullshitters we've ever had the misfortune to run the country. And still there are people out there who would vote for them, even to the point of bringing back Boris. Yet still, under Rishi Sunak, they're saying inflation will be brought down by half this year, and Sunak says he's the man to do it. I say he could sit in his hands and do nothing like I fancy he normally does, and it's still going to come down. Why though, Damo? Well, I shall tell you. Tory mismanagement has been a series of shocks to the system. Largely, the economy has gotten over these shocks, though. They've gotten over the shock of opening up too quickly after the pandemic. Time has passed. And Brexit predates that. So largely, the country has adjusted to that as well. Things have settled down. So you would expect prices to settle down a bit too. Easy for you to say, perhaps, Damo. I'm still paying a second mortgage every time my gas bill arrives. I hear you. Mine isn't cheap either. But as I set out in another video the other day, The price per therm of wholesale gas, the price of which all energy products are based on, stupid system, especially when you think more than 40% of our electricity, for example, comes from renewable resources, yet we're charged for it based on the price of a fossil fuel. Now, gas has fallen from highs of over 500 pence per therm back in August, but it was 155 pence per therm the other week when I did that video. It's a huge drop. That's down to levels not seen since before the war in Ukraine. And when I made that video the other week, and despite the fact the energy companies could drop their prices immediately, since many are also producers and their supply arms effectively buy from themselves, therefore, they'll wait until they next buy more, by which time, of course, they will be doing so much more cheaply. And so you would expect prices to fall for you anyway, in line with that. Shell, what? Get this one. Have a seat if you're of a nervous disposition or you're a little bit easily shocked. Shell are even about to pay tax here for the first time in 5 years. Now, steady on, guys. It's not only in gas we've seen this drop in wholesale prices, though. Brent crude oil prices have also fallen, so you'd expect petrol prices to keep coming down, though, of course, there's the spectre of the Tories hiking tax on that again in a few months' time, as much as by 12% could be the rise, 12 pence per litre even, could be the rise. Effectively, us ordinary folk paying for their misspending again. The tax on petrol and diesel was already ridiculous anyway. The wholesale price of wheat has also fallen as well, giving an insight into food prices going forward. You might not have heard about that one. It's not been widely reported. Everything is settling, finding its balance again, and no Tory has had to lift a finger over that. Think of it this way. Can you remember when people were out panic buying bog rolls? Well, all of this is the equivalent of various markets panicking over their bog rolls too. We are, rest assured, we can get our loo roll again these days, and as such, the markets are breathing similar sighs of relief. In fact, prices are set to fall so well, the OBR are actually forecasting deflation, reverse inflation, in 2024 and 2025 at the moment, all before Sunak even made his promise to get inflation down himself. But you might have missed that, as most of our media have. You know what won't go away, though? Austerity, as the Tories see opportunities to tighten spending yet again, straight back to strangling our everyday lives. Those wage rises they'll then be able to afford more easily, they'll keep saying they can't, because it's all about us knowing our place, you see. It's all about helping those who would control us and exploit us, because those same self-serving people are the people who keep this rancid Victorian relic of a party going. But it won't be born out of a reaction to poor decisions or global pressures. It will be entirely choices of the Tories' own making, just as Brexit was. We cannot get these Tories out of power fast enough. We sure as hell cannot let Sunak get away with telling us that falling inflation to come has got anything to do with him.